Hi there folks, my name is Dangly Bits. I'm an announcer and a bench coach, and I thought, given the focus at the moment in the community on giving feedback and receiving feedback, particularly in the announcer community, it might be useful to share some information and some ideas around what makes best practice feedback. The reason that I'm choosing to do this is because in my day job I am a skills trainer. I teach managers and leaders to be better managers and leaders, and a large part of that is about me delivering feedback to them and about them figuring out how best to deliver feedback to their staff to get the best performance out of them. So a lot of this stuff is coming out of the kind of best practice guidelines that we teach over here in the job that I do. So why is feedback important? Well, it's absolutely key to any kind of development process, and hopefully we all want to be getting better. And that's what's really at the core of all this push, and that's what's made me feel really great about it coming out of the community, is that it's really about getting better at what we do. And that shows for me a real respect for the art. It shows for me a real respect for the people that we work with. And I think that's what underlies it all, is ultimately, whenever a league is giving us their mic, or indeed any kind of hosting organisation, be that WFTDA.tv or any kind of broadcaster, the World Cup's another great example, we're being trusted there. They're saying, we trust you to be our voice. And that's a massive covenant of trust for me. And so I think it's really important that we honour that by making sure that we're the best we can be, and giving good feedback and receiving that feedback are absolutely key to pushing ourselves forward and making sure that we earn the faith that's placed in us every single time we get out there and get on the mic. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about feedback. And I want to put feedback in a context, and the context that I want to put it in is the difference between feedback and criticism. So when we're talking about these two different words, they sometimes get used interchangeably, and I think it's important actually for us to take a moment and separate the two a little bit and talk about what I mean when I'm talking about criticism and feedback. But an important part of that is going to be what you mean when you're talking about criticism and feedback. So what I'd like you to do is just take a couple of seconds now, and what I want you to do is think about criticism and feedback. What are the differences for you? I want you to have a think about that, and to help you think about that, I want you to pause the video. But to help you pause the video, I'm going to do an action pose so that it looks cool on your screen whilst you're thinking. Action pose! Okay, so hopefully you've had a couple of seconds to think about criticism and feedback and what they mean for you. Now I'm going to talk through what they mean for me, and maybe you can compare and contrast and see what you think about my take on criticism and feedback. So what are the differences? Well, first of all, I would say that criticism is based on the past and focuses on the past. It looks backwards in time. It's looking at what happened and talking about that. It's also quite often unwelcome or unasked for. So people give you criticism sometimes when you haven't asked them to get involved and give you any kind of feedback or comment process. Criticism is also tough on people, quite typically. So it's looking at the people and the errors that they made, and that can be pretty hard, actually, for someone to take on board and for someone to make the most out of the opportunity to get some kind of comment from the people that are coming with them. And also, occasionally criticism can be used as a weapon or as a political tool to try and make some kind of political point, which isn't necessarily the best way to help someone learn. So, thinking then a bit more about feedback, when we think about feedback, just to compare and contrast with the criticism point, is that feedback should be focused on the future. It should be focused on how do we get better the next time we do this. Feedback also should always be owned by the person who's receiving the feedback. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be the ones who prompted it or asked for it, although that will typically be the case. But it does mean they really have to have ownership of that. And what I really mean by that is it's up to them to decide what action they take based on that feedback. It's up to them to control that. And if you're receiving feedback, that's an important thing to bear in mind, is that ultimately it's your choice how you respond to taking feedback on board. Feedback also, in comparison with criticism, is tough on the issues and the problems, not necessarily tough on the people. And that's an important difference for me, because it has to be focused on the issues, not on the person, and being impersonal. It can't be about you are a bad person, whereas criticism sometimes can come out sounding that way. So maybe the difference might be, a piece of criticism might be, hey, you announced last week at our bout and it was rubbish. And let me tell you 5 ways it was rubbish. So that's an example of criticism. The same kind of thing given as feedback might be more like this. Hey, you announced at our bout the other week. It wasn't the best it could be. Let's talk about 5 different ways maybe you could do something differently next time and maybe improve. So you can see that the focus in the feedback is on the future. How do you improve? How can I help you to be better? So that's the key differences for me between criticism and feedback. And always be clear when you're giving feedback that you don't slip into delivering criticism. Okay, so we've already talked a little bit now more about feedback, why we do it, and what's the context in which we do it. So now I'd like to start talking about actual feedback. And I'd like to start that with another little think bit, where I want you to pause the video and have a bit of a think. The question this time is going to be, think of a time or several times where you've got an example of receiving bad feedback. Now, what I don't mean by that is I don't mean feedback that was constructive, feedback that was about something you did badly that you can be better at. What I mean is a time when the feedback really wasn't effective, a time when the feedback didn't land with you for whatever reason, or a time when the feedback wasn't what you needed and didn't help you to get better. So, have a think about that, and as always, if you're going to have a think, we're going to do you an action pose to help you focus. Pause the video on the action pose, have a bit of a think about a time when you received bad feedback, and we'll have a chat about that afterwards and maybe give you some examples of what are the most common answers when I ask someone what kind of things make up bad feedback. Here's your action pose. Ha! Ha! Action pose! Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance there to have a bit of a think about times when you've received feedback that wasn't as effective as it could be. And I thought it might be useful now just to share a couple of the examples of things that typically come up when I ask groups that question, when I say, what kind of examples can you give me of bad feedback? So one of the things that almost always comes up when we're talking about bad feedback is, it came way too late. So in this instance, it's where feedback has taken too long to be delivered, and actually someone's been doing something wrong or something they could be doing better for a period when they didn't have to be because you could have told them. And people really hate that. Also, a very common one is that the feedback was not focused enough. It wasn't specific enough. So it's where you get stuff like this classic one. Oh, it was really good. What was really good? What made it good? What can I do to keep being good? And what can I do to make it better? Vague doesn't help. Vague isn't going to help us at all. Another example of some bad feedback, things to avoid, is giving too much feedback all at once. A typical person can only probably handle 4 or 5 points before they start to get overwhelmed. So really, when you're delivering feedback, think about what are the key messages that you want to get through and just deliver those. Deliver the key stuff, because the littler stuff you can get the next time and the next time and the next time. It's always going to be an iterative process, which means we're always going to keep doing it again and again and getting better and better and better. Some of the other stuff that people talk about sometimes is where it feels too personal. We talked about the difference between criticism and the difference between feedback and what that might mean. So where it's really critical or where it's personal is another thing that people stumble across. Also, people don't like feedback where you don't help them find a way forwards. You just dump it on their doorstep like, "Thump, here you go, here's some rotting meat, deal with that." Roink. Exit stage right. Or left, I can't remember. Yeah, you find that people sometimes do that. They say, "This was rubbish, bye," and then don't help you find a way forwards. And that's a key part of the feedback process, helping that person find a way to be better. That's what we're here and that's what we're all about. And also, feedback that is all too praise heavy or all too critical. You want to have a balance between the two so that people understand that there's some things they're doing well, some things they're doing not so well. And that can be a bit of a challenge as well, because you find yourself in a situation where you're thinking, well, he's just said good things. Did I do nothing wrong? Was I perfect? Or the opposite, he's just slagging me off. Did I not hit anything right? And you've got to find a balance between the two, because otherwise people lose out on stuff. And this is one of my big bugbears actually for this, is that with that, if you deliver all just positive feedback, all just praise, or all just negative feedback, you're missing half the learning. And so often I find in UK culture, what we end up doing is we deliver only the negative stuff, and you just hammer it in. You need to do this better, you need to do this better. I saw you do this wrong, I saw you do this wrong. I saw you do everything wrong. This was the wrong thing. That doesn't help as well as we could, because they must have done probably something right. And if we don't tell them what they're doing right, they can't keep doing that. They can't be confident and keep doing that. So we've got to be balanced in the way that we give that feedback. So we talked a little bit there about what makes bad feedback, and we've got some ideas from that probably and the previous section about what makes good feedback. So for the next bit, we're now going to introduce a couple of acronyms that will hopefully help you. One's about setting the tone of the feedback, and one's about the practicalities of how you actually say it or write it, because it applies both to spoken and written feedback. And the acronyms we're going to use are BOOST and AID. And the next bit, we'll have a chat about those. Okay? Okay, so we've spoken a little bit about all the background stuff around the feedback, and we've talked about what makes bad feedback. Now let's talk about what makes good feedback. The kind of feedback you want to deliver, the kind of feedback that's going to have the biggest impact for the person that you're delivering it to. And that's what really matters. Remember, the feedback isn't about you. Sounds obvious. It's about them. Okay, so how are you going to do that? Well, the two acronyms I introduced before were BOOST and AID, and we're going to talk through those now. We'll start with BOOST, because BOOST is about the tone of what you deliver. It's about what you choose to put in and what you choose not to. It's about how you choose to deliver that. So BOOST stands for balanced, observed, owned, specific, and timely. Let's talk through each one of those in turn. So balanced, what are we talking about there? Well, we're talking about the balance between stuff they can do better and stuff that they did really well. And you want to make sure that's balanced. What you don't want, and what I'm not trying to say, is that you need to make sure that it's 50-50, that each one of those has an equal number of things. That's not it at all. What I'm saying is you need to be clear in your own mind that you're acknowledging the good stuff and the stuff that they can do better. It doesn't have to be an equal measure, but you have to make sure there's a bit of both in there for them. Otherwise, you're missing out on the totality of the learning and making it a whole learning experience. The next word was observed, and what I mean by observed is it has to be what you see, not what you think you see, which seems a bit odd, but what I'm talking about there is talk about the behaviour that you're seeing, not about what you think is motivating that behaviour. So to give you an example, I could say, when I was delivering some feedback, in that last meeting, you were really disengaged and you looked bored. Okay, so that's something, that's talking about the motivation behind them. They were bored, they were disengaged. A better way of phrasing it might be, in that last meeting, I noticed you were slouched back a little bit and your shoulders were a bit slumped. And that gave me an impression that perhaps you might be experiencing something that wasn't great. Could we talk about what that was and maybe how that manifested? So we're not talking about the thing that's happening in the background. We're letting them fill that in. We're letting them tell us, yes, I was bored, or yes, I was disengaged. We are saying what we saw, observed, saying what you see, not what you think might be behind what you see. Okay? The next word we had was owned. Own it. I saw you do this. I think this. Not we. Oh, it's floaty, it's light. We, so that I don't have to take the blame if you don't like what I'm saying to you. Forget that. Absolutely forget that. Own it. Own the feedback that you're delivering. You saw it. You think this. Engage with them. And that's why that's important. It creates engagement between the two of you, and it means that they're more likely to listen to the feedback you've actually got to give them. And that's really, really important. The S is for specific, and when we talk about specific, it's kind of talking about that thing I said in the example of the bad version. Be specific. Don't talk in generalities. Don't say, that was really good, or no, it wasn't so great. Talk about specifically, what was it that made it great? What was it that made it not so great? What was it that could have made it better? So think about that in terms of maybe not saying just that something's good. Saying something's good is okay. Then add that last little bit, the word because. Tell them why. That was good because you did this. And that will really help them. Or that wasn't great, and it's because of this. Be specific. And timely, well, the generally held kind of opinion is the sooner you can deliver the feedback, the better. Two main reasons for that. Number one, if you're delivering that feedback as soon afterwards, they can start acting on it as soon afterwards. So they're not doing something wrong or not performing at their best for a long period before you then tell them how to get better. Also, it helps it to be fresh in their minds so they can link it to and really have the memory of what they did and how they might change it again in the future. And that is really, really important. So, boost for the tone of how we deliver what we're delivering. Okay? Aid is more about the specific structures we might use when we're delivering it. So AID, dead simple, stands for action, impact, do. Okay? Action, impact, do. That's all it is. And let's go through those again one at a time. Action. What was the thing that they did? dead simple. What was the thing that they did? Action, for example. I noticed that you dropped a couple of swear words into that last broadcast. That would be the action bit. Okay. Impact. What was the impact of the action that you're describing? So, to follow on with our example, I noticed you put a couple of swear words into that last broadcast. The impact on me was that it made me feel disengaged and a little bit uncomfortable. And I worry that the impact on other people might be that they might turn off because they might be offended. Okay? So that's action and impact. And the final one is do. And really what we're talking about here is what can they do differently next time? What can they change? And this is about making sure they've got something they can take away, not just a problem that you're dropping on their doorstep. So the do differently might be in that instance. I noticed that you swore a couple of times in that last broadcast. The impact might be you might offend people with that. Actually, the swears might offend people, and that might mean they switch off and we lose viewers. And maybe next time, check yourself before you do it. So maybe don't swear so much, or really think about the words that are coming out of your mouth before you say them. So you can see there, action, impact, do. And actually, if you watch me delivering feedback, which I do a lot in my work, you will see that I literally walk through that every single time. So I'll maybe do 4 or 5 AIDs, 4 or 5 aids when I'm delivering feedback, when someone says, what can I do? So action, impact, do talks about how you deliver it, how to structure it, which can be one of the hardest things actually, is where do I even start? And boost, about the tone, about how you deliver that feedback. So I want you to think about action, impact, do, and boost, and maybe even give yourself a bit of a practice like I have. Think of a situation, think about how you might deliver that feedback to the other person. Okay? And whilst you're doing that, take some time out from this video before we go to our wrap-up and some last tips, and actually have a think about what you'll do differently. So whilst you're thinking, here's an action pose. Action pose. Okay, so we spent about 20 minutes together talking about feedback. We've had a bit of a look at what's the difference between feedback and criticism. Why is feedback important? We've talked about what makes bad feedback, things to avoid, and we've talked about a couple of models that will hopefully help us avoid delivering bad feedback and make our feedback as effective as possible. Thanks very much for taking the time. This might be something I do more of, it depends. If you like it, or if you've got any questions or queries, please put them down in the comments below. What's important to me is what you take away from it. So feel free to take what you want. Don't feel you have to take everything I say as gospel truth. Question and challenge if you need to, and figure out what works for you, because ultimately that's all that matters. I will put out my details, my contact details down in the bits below, the info below the video, and have a look at those if you need to get in contact with me, or you want to hit me up on the social medias, because I'm reliably informed that's what everyone cool does these days, or maybe that was last week, I can't remember. And yeah, thanks very much for taking the time. If there's anything else I can help you with, please let me know, and I'll catch up with you again soon. Thanks for coming.